Well, thank you so much. Well, then welcome listeners, welcome watchers. It is so good to have you. My name's Russ Simon with Leadership Solutions, and I am with Keith Denning today, the founder of Flourish First. I'm excited to have Keith with us. He helps people understand what's happening inside of them in the moments that matter most so they can move from reaction to something more intentional in their relationships, their leadership, and their daily life. And those are all aspects that I care about helping people grow in. So I'm excited for this. I know I'm going to take some things away. One of the things I appreciate about his approach is that it doesn't replace the kinds of frameworks and habits that we talk about. It actually helps people to follow through on them more consistently by understanding what's happening underneath the moment. So it's part of that we just need to get that awareness of. Keith's going to help us understand that. And as we explore today, that internal clarity often shows up in how people manage their energy, the clarity that they think and lead with, and how consistently they're able to execute. So, Keith, really excited and happy to have you with us today. And I want to turn it over to you to just get the ball rolling here.
Yeah, Russ, thanks for the great introduction and inviting me to be here. And what you said about consistency, that's actually where this whole conversation begins. Because most people think if they know what to do, they'll do it. And a lot of the time they can. But in real life, there are moments where something else is driving the reaction. And that's where people start to fill the gap because something underneath is shaping how they show up in those moments. And that shows up everywhere: leadership, relationships, even in something as simple as trying to stay consistent with habits we know matter. I'm curious, Russ, do you see that with leaders you work with?
Absolutely. I see it with myself.
Yeah. What's interesting is it's usually not people you'd expect. It's the steady one, the responsible one, the one others rely on. They care deeply, they show up, they're doing a lot right. But internally, there's often this quieter experience of, why does this feel harder than it should? Or why do I keep having the same reaction in these moments? And that gap between how capable they are and what they're experiencing, that's where frustration starts to build. Do you see that tension between capability and internal experiences in your work?
Yes, again, this is exactly what I experience. And so I am able to speak from my experience a lot of times. I'm working on a book called The Capacity Wall that I've outlined for our viewers behind me, where it focuses on one's physical energy, their mental edge, and then the execution in whatever part of life that they're trying to do that, whether personal, professional, athletic, whatever. And what I find is those words capacity and capability, they're so intertwined and dependent on each other. And so often we may have the capability to do something and we don't have the capacity to actually do it. And we don't have the margin in our lives. Maybe there's too much in there and it's pushing up and creating cracks in our lives. And so for you coming in today to help us understand a lot more about what's underneath even that foundation, that's going to be really helpful for me and for our listeners and viewers today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this will help you, Russ, with those exact things. So most people respond to this gap by trying to do things better. They try to communicate better. They try to stay calmer. They try to be more disciplined, more consistent. And sometimes that works for a little while. But then the same pattern shows up again. And that's when it starts to feel stuck. Because now it's not just the moment, it's why does this keep happening? And that's usually where people start to think something is wrong with them when really something just hasn't been understood yet. Have you seen that where people know exactly what to do, but still can't sustain it?
Well, interestingly, my coaching is kind of built on the health and wellness side of things. For the most part, my coaching is built on that side of things. On the business side of things, there's a lot that people have not learned that they need to learn and create the awareness. And they're like, oh, that makes sense, like the Pareto principle or something like that. When it comes to health and wellness, I think people have heard this. There's been the public service announcements that go about it, the research that comes out. And so, yeah, my fundamental five are so like fundamental, right? They're foundational, but they're also fundamental. And that's what I found is these
They're
simple things.
anchors, right? Yeah,
Yeah. So that nothing new in what I share with people when I say, hey, let's start with our mindset, the identity, like, Atomic Habits, which James Clear is going to talk about. Let's talk about getting our good rest at night, that we've really dialed in our sleep so that we feel good. Because once we feel good there, we do better on these other three, which is now we're hydrating better. And because we're hydrated better, now we feel the more energy to move. And once we're moving more, then our body wants different things for our nutrition. And so those five, when I talk about it, mindset, recovery, hydration, movement, nutrition, everybody knows about that. It's exactly what you're saying. And they're like, that's so easy. And so as a coach, I'm not giving anything new there as much as now I'm the accountability and I'm answering questions and things like that. But it's what you're talking about is if I know all of this, why am I not doing it?
exactly. Yeah. And what I've found is that the reactions aren't random. They're usually connected to something underneath, something meaningful. So instead of asking, how do I fix this reaction? A more helpful question becomes, what is this reaction trying to show me? Because something in that moment is being touched, a meaning, a past experience, something that matters. And when people begin to see that, even a little, it creates space. And that space is where something different becomes possible. You see, you see this in leadership all the time. A leader is in a meeting, something gets challenged, and their reaction becomes faster than they expected. Maybe they become more direct, shut something down, or feel the need to explain and justify. And afterward, there's often that moment of, that's not how I wanted to handle that. And it's not that they didn't know what to do. They've been trained, they understand leadership, but in that moment, something else was already happening internally. And because they didn't see it in real time, the reaction took over before they had the chance to choose something different. And when they begin to understand what's happening in those moments, those interactions start to shift, not because of the new tactic, but because they see what's driving the moment. Do you see that show up in leadership conversations?
Oh, yeah. So this is really great. Especially I love that example that you used where maybe something happens and instead of responding to it the way we like cognitively know, we react to it maybe in an emotional knee-jerk reaction on that one. And so yeah, that could throw us off. And then once we're off balance there, like in and not in harmony with our own self, that makes it difficult. Where I felt convicted personally was as a parent, like that's where that's where I feel like I have more
Yeah.
of those knee-jerk reactions. And yeah, I know good parenting, and yet I execute so much below my knowledge level on that one. And so in that boardroom experience, I felt a lot more like the parent, uh, I guess, the relevance on that one. So yes, I do see it
Yeah,
with myself. I see it with leaders, and I
absolutely.
especially see it.
Interesting that you bring up parenting. And that's what is interesting is that same pattern shows up at home too. You see it a lot with spouses and between parents and teenagers. A parent says something simple, trying to guide or help, and the teen reacts strongly, pushes back, shuts down, or pulls away. And the parent's reaction might be frustration or trying to correct it quickly. But underneath, there's more going on for both of them. For the teen, it might feel like pressure or not being understood. For the parent, it might touch something like, I'm trying to do this right. I'm just trying to help. Why isn't this working? And when neither side understands what's happening underneath, the moment escalates. You've been there, right? And
Oh,
when
I'm a great
even one
escalator.
but when even one person begins to see it differently, the whole interaction can shift. Not because they said the perfect thing, but because they understood what was happening. It's the same pattern, just in a different environment. What's interesting is when people don't understand what's happening inside them, it doesn't just affect their reactions, it affects their energy because they're carrying things they haven't made sense of yet. And that creates internal friction. So even if they're doing the right things externally, it still feels heavier than it should. And when that friction starts to clear, even a little, people often feel a shift in energy almost immediately. How do you see that connection between internal clarity and energy?
Ooh, you're speaking my language here. You know this, Keith. Yeah, I am a big believer that that word energy equates with frequency and vibration, right? And so we walk into a room and we're like, I don't like the vibe in that room, or there's others where we really resonate, right? We use these vibration words and it sounds trendy, but we use those words because they are so true, right? And so, yes, it shifts the energy. All of a sudden, we are vibrating on a new frequency, and usually that means our frequency is dropped, right? And so the energy is different, the vibration that we're on, and now we're giving off that vibration. And we feel those things. We are connected between people, especially in interpersonal relationships. We read body language so quick, right? Like we see somebody,
Mhm.
we're always detecting the undetectable, oddly, the subtle things that are happening there. And so then, yeah, what happens to my edge personally is if it is a sharp edge, well, all of a sudden that sharp edge just became very dull. And all of a sudden I am, again, a blunt force instrument rather than a nice precision tool that's able to like approach this the right way in a surgical, kind, caring, maybe kind of way. And now I'm just blunt force trauma happening over here. So yeah, there, I definitely feel and understand that connection.
Yeah. And that's where what you talk about as edge really starts to show up. Because when someone understands what's happening inside them, they're not second guessing as much. They're not reacting as quickly. There's more clarity, more presence, and they're able to respond in a way that's aligned with how they want to show up. And that's a different experience than trying to manage everything in the moment. And this is where execution becomes more consistent. Not because someone is forcing it, but because there's less internal resistance pulling them off track. This is actually where something like your F5 protocol becomes really powerful because those are clear, practical anchors. But even with that structure, people can still struggle with consistency. And it's usually not because the structure is wrong, it's because something underneath hasn't been understood yet. And when that understanding starts to come into place, those habits become more natural, more consistent, and more sustainable. And that's really the work, helping people see what's happening in those moments so they can respond differently and show up the way they actually want to. Where do you see people struggle most with consistency in F5?
Okay, with F5 specifically, and I don't, I'm gonna, you help direct me if I'm headed the wrong direction, where this may be going. So when it comes to, for example, getting our mindset correct, to our
Mhm.
recovery, our hydration, our movement, and our nutrition, the one that usually has the most difficulty changing is that sleep routine. You know, there's routines and rituals that we're already in that need to change to be able to optimize that opportunity and be able to make the shift. And that's the one that actually makes the biggest difference out of everything, right? It's like plugging in our cell phone is the easy example, I think, these days on that one. And if you're not charging it well, it's just not going to function well and it's not going to function very long. And once they dial that one in, that makes all the difference on these cascading ones, I guess, that come from it. And then the one that's, I guess, that they're able to make the easiest change on because they're already doing it as well, but that ritual and routine can change is the hydration, right? And that allows them to have different energy flow within them happening. But yeah, I think the question you're asking probably relates more to that sleep and that recovery and changing the rituals, the routines, and essentially all the underlying habits around that to be able to do it. So is that
Yeah,
where
so
you were
what?
wondering?
Yeah, absolutely. What's the biggest challenge with getting that sleep? What is it that's keeping them from getting there?
Oh, okay. These days, three main things that I'm seeing. Often with parents, and okay, with parents, it's now I'm putting kids to bed and they've got a routine that I'm actually trying to have my rituals around, right? And so it can be a whole family dynamic that's happening there. Often it's spouses, and so I'll interject here before I continue with the next one. an experience that I had where I wanted to move from I felt like I was doing well on 6 hours of sleep, but I knew just from the research I was outside of an optimal zone. And I decided I'm going to go 12 weeks at 8 hours and just dial it in. And I love the mantra of be your own scientist, right? Like try it out, see how it goes. And so I had this self-imposed guilt, but I felt it coming from my family, even though they weren't giving it, which was if I go to bed earlier and they're still up doing homework or doing a puzzle or something like that, I'm a bad dad. And so I thought, oh, I need to go to bed earlier. And I am up hours, seriously, hours before the rest of my family. Because I get up between 5 and 5:30 every day. I like attacking my day and in the right way, getting my mindset right. I go to work on myself before I go to work with other people. And so I thought for them, their whole sleep cycle is shifted forward and mine is shifted this way. So we have these bookends that don't line up. And I remember they were doing a puzzle at the table and I came out and it was a Sunday night and I had made the decision so I'm going to get 8 hours of sleep, but there was just this guilt of being a bad dad, poor spouse. And so I went out and I said, hey, you guys, and I explained, this is really important to me. I know I can be better, feel better, perform better if I'm getting better sleep. So for the next 12 weeks, I really want to try to dial in 8 hours a night. Here's what it's going to look like. And here's the funny thing. They're all like, yeah, cool. Makes sense. Go to bed. No problem. And I was like, oh, all right. That's nice. So, they have their stuff that they're doing. They didn't need me up to finish their homework or do the puzzle or whatever. And so, it was a wonderful experiment. And sometimes that's what's happening is it's a family dynamic. And there's a person I'm coaching right now where their spouse, they really do have that conflict there where it's like, no, I'm not going to bed yet. You're not going to bed yet. And that can be difficult. So that's one. And then the other that gets in the way. So there's a family dynamic, and then there's the distractions that we allow. And here's what I notice in the day and age of so much media coming at us, whether it's on our phone or in our rooms. I think one of the worst habits we can have is to have a TV in our room, but we do it regardless of whether or not we do it. I got it right here, and if I'm not careful about it, I still got a screen in my room, right? And so it's so bad because often many of the clients that I'm working with it's I'm sitting in bed and I'm scrolling, or I'm sitting in bed and I'm watching, and that we just know how this is affecting melatonin, circadian rhythm. Like there's so many things, and then just your brain is being stimulated, and what's the loop that's open? I guess is like getting things done with who is it? David Allen that talks about that, all these open loops, right? So when you're talking about like what are the things that could get in the way, there are so many factors, and then you take some people and they've got all those factors happening right there, right? And so it's a matter,
Not to
this is
mention
where I think
pressures
you
from
start to,
work and yeah,
oh,
not to
there you go.
mention
We haven't
pressures
even
from
hit that.
work
Yeah.
and other maybe community things that are driving them, taking their time. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's so many things that can keep us from keeping that sleep habit down. And it's so, as you said, it's so crucial and so critical. Plus, there's the dynamic of, research studies show that when spouses go to bed at the same time together, they have closer relationships and stronger relationships. So how do you work around that, right? Yeah. So, and that's really the distinction here, because this isn't about replacing what people are already doing. There are a lot of good frameworks and systems out there, including F5. This is about adding something that's often missing, an understanding of the internal experience that shapes how people actually show up. Because without that, even the best tools can be hard to apply consistently. The dynamic of spouses wanting to go to bed at different times, the story that you brought up, right? There's some conflict there. Now, hopefully that conflict doesn't turn into contention, because then it gets a lot worse. There's always going to be conflict. In fact, one of the things that we teach is conflict is a pathway to greater intimacy, but it's how we handle those things. And that's why understanding these internal experiences that shape how we actually show up is so crucial. Because without that, even the best tools can be hard to apply consistently. But when that understanding is there, everything else starts to work better. And for a lot of people, even just beginning to notice this starts to change how things feel. And if they want to go deeper, we walk through this step by step in the Unlock workshop. But really, it starts with awareness. Because over time, how we respond in those moments, that's what shapes who we become. And when that starts to shift, it doesn't just change one conversation, it changes how we live, how we love, and how we lead.
I completely agree. And I love how you just called out straight up, like it begins with awareness. It reminds me, maybe you or some of our audience members have a habit of having a word for the year or a phrase for the year. So mine
Mhm.
this year is abundance. I'm striving to live a life of abundance. Last year, my word was gratitude, and then it moved into uh, oh, now the word escaped me. Gratitude is the feeling that I have, but being generous. It moved from gratitude to being generous, right? It had to start with awareness. And at first, and I bought into a program, like a coaching program, to help me with this, and it was really beneficial. But oh, again, the awareness. I kind of went through and just on my own. There were 7 categories I was working on, from my relationships to my finances to my spirituality, and I rated myself, and I rated myself pretty high. I'm like, I don't know, maybe I wasted some money on this coaching program to do it. And then I started week 1, which is really like assessing your, like, how grateful are you? What do you really see? What does your life really look like around these? And I thought, oh my goodness, I am absolutely below 5 on all of these, where I'd rated myself closer to 10 on all of them. And all of a sudden, I had a real reason to continue on in this program and move from that awareness into deeper understanding, and then making changes in my life that allowed me to now, then move from gratitude to generosity to now an abundance lifestyle is what I'm really trying to share every single day with myself and others. So maybe that goes along illustratively with what you were
That,
just sharing there.
that goes perfectly along because now if we can be aware of, particularly in the moments that matter, aware what's coming up inside of us before we react,
Mhm.
we can then respond. And I know that your religious persuasion, we're taught that men are created to act, not to be acted upon. But so often we let the emotions inside of us let us be acted upon instead of act. So that's where this awareness before we actually react becomes so important.
Man, I love again that you've called out those 2 words, because we know them and we know when we're reacting and when we're being responsive instead of reacting. So I've got a question for you. What have you found through developing your coaching program that helps make that shift? You used the word earlier, shift, and that is a real word, I believe, like making paradigm shifts. Bob Proctor would talk a lot about a paradigm shift and moving from a side of, survival to, again, I'll use a flourishing word like yours, flourish first. And how do we move from the survival reactionary to responding and flourishing? I think that's
Yeah.
what I'm wondering on that one.
Wonderful question. And thank you for asking that. Um, so it really begins by noticing. So you may not, and it may take several interactions, but what you will find is if you go through, most interactions, you are able to respond. But in those moments where you're not reacting, where you are reacting, if you'll just notice afterwards, what caused me to do that? What was in my mind? What was I thinking? And then the next time another similar situation comes up, you're able to hopefully hold on to that and say, oh, here it comes again. Last time I did this. This time I want to respond. So it's really noticing, being aware that you're in that situation.
I like that a lot. That reminded me of 2 things. One, I like that John Maxwell, he does point out that experience is not the best teacher. It's reflected experience is that best teacher,
Exactly.
right? And it sounds like that's what you're helping train people to do. Is part of that awareness is, I've had the experience, I reflect on that experience, I'm able to understand what happens and what that looks like, and have greater awareness. I guess even our reticular activation system, right, is activated now because of
Yes.
that awareness. And so now we're like, okay, antennas up or the radar's up. And man, I always
Yep.
forget this guy's name, but she wrote that classic kind of like short story. I don't know what we call it, but Life in Five Chapters, right? And Life in Five Chapters where, chapter one, I walk down the road and I fall in the manhole, right? And it just goes like that until ch and it's like one sentence is each chapter, and chapter five is I walk down a new road, right? And I think that's what happens is we walk down the road and then we start to see the manhole and we're like, now I walk around the manhole. So we start to move from what happens to us and allowing ourselves to be acted upon, like you said, right? And then we start acting. And even when we start acting, we find like way better ways to act. It's not just like getting around the manhole at this point. I'm just going to go a different
Absolutely.
direction. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that can solve so many of these reactions that we go through. Um, and as I said, it usually starts after the moment because that's when it's easiest to see.
Mhm.
And some people might think that felt bigger than it should. And that becomes that entry point, right? We recognize earlier and earlier in each time, and then that space is there, and now we're able to make some adjustments. Just said, we're not going to be acted upon. We're going to act. We're going to respond rather than react. And that's really what we help people understand. And then we have some tools that help them move beyond that. So it's not just internally they're helping, but also the relationships with other people, the conversations for example, at the meeting that we talked about for the leader, or between a parent and a child. Those are the kinds of things that we want to help.
Oh, I love it. What are some of the things that you've noticed when it comes to the results, I guess, that you've seen that you've been able to help people have? What would be like their testimonial if they were here to say, here's the result because of what I experienced?
Um, what we experience, and this includes myself. Remember, I'm just a guide here. I'm not the expert, but in my own experience, is because as you know, I've raised five kids and now I'm raising three grandkids. So I'm living the life of a parent um, of teenagers. And what I've noticed is that there are not as many arguments, there aren't as many hurt feelings, there aren't as many um, traumatic experiences as there have been in the past.
That
There's greater closeness, greater understanding, if nothing else, more compassion and charity, empathy for what's going on in the lives of those you work with. And whether it's at home, whether it's at work, or in the community, that's what happens.
I love it. It seems like what this all always comes back to is actually relationships. It's funny because we keep talking about reacting versus responding and like this underlying to like, why, if I know this, why don't I do it? And the cool thing about this isn't so much that the result is now I am able to execute on the F5 or have greater capacity in my life, but it actually comes down to something much more eternal and enduring and even enjoyable in life, which is the relationships. And
Yeah.
am I off at all on that
No, you're right on.
observation?
In fact, as you know, there's only two things we take with us from this life: our knowledge and our relationships. Those are the only things that go with us. And
Yeah,
in
no
fact, I said,
U-Hauls at the funeral, right?
nothing else is going, right? So here's an interesting thought. This is in a religious context as well, Russ, and I know you appreciate that. But in Christ's example of we must remove the beam that is in our eye before we can remove the mote that's in someone else's. So as we recognize what's going inside of us in those moments that matter, we're far better, more capable, have the capacity, as you like to say, to really help the other individual.
Wow. And it seems like you're also giving the capabilities to do it because sometimes we have the desire, we don't have the know-how. And so sometimes, yeah, I think it's the know-how that you come in and you're able to help us with like, yeah, I understand that I keep doing this. I don't know how to do it differently, or I don't know what better even looks like in this case, or even what different looks like in this case.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's a whole different
okay.
conversation, Russ. But yes, we do we do talk about that. Yes.
I, I imagine so. So I'm wondering, as we're getting close to our time here, there's at least two questions I want to make sure that I get our audience answers to, as well as allowing you to share any final thoughts you want to make sure, like, oh man, if we leave this podcast and I have not shared this, I've done a disservice, right? So if there's anything left on the table, I want to make sure that you get it. But the two questions I know everybody's going to be asking is, number one, like, how do I recognize, like, oh, I need to talk to Keith. I need to find out more about Flourish First because I need this in my life. It sounds like if I were self-diagnosing, it could be anything from my relationships are suffering because of the way that I am approaching it and
Show
having
up.
more responsive, or excuse me, reactionary than responsive, or even like I just see a pattern even if I'm not doing it. Oh, it's like there's a pattern and I just need to break that one. And then there's like this spectrum that I can see happening here, even to like with my clients, where it's even just creating healthier habits in their life and trying to understand what are some of these underlying, maybe heavier things that need to be understood through that awareness, and then having a skill set capability brought in to be able to do it. I guess I like three set words, right? I like to have the mindset, and once I've got the mindset, then I need the skill set to be able to do it. And then even if I got the skill set, I need the tool set to be able to do it, right? Because when you have the tool, the job's half done. And often we may have one of those things, maybe even two, but without all three, it's very difficult. So it sounds like that's it. But if you could define for us first, how does someone self-identify and they're like, Keith could really help me in this?
Yeah. So the best place to start, and thanks for asking this, is the Unlock Workshop. And this is a live conversation that we have every Thursday evening at 7 o'clock Mountain Time. And in this conversation, we walk through this step by step. And you can find it at flourishfirst.com/workshop. That's where you can register for this workshop. Um, so that's the first step because we go through um, give you that understanding.
Excellent.
And so,
Well, oh, go ahead.
and by the way, that doesn't cost anything. It's there for you. So,
Oh,
because we
so
really
we
want
can
to help
we
people.
can test drive.
Absolutely. Yeah, you come in and take a test drive of this and see how it works out for you. We'll give you some tools there. We'll give you a lot of understanding. And we'll go into much more depth than we have today about recognizing when you're just before that moment happens.
Excellent.
And we'll
So
talk
give us,
about, there's a lot of different ways people arrive at conversations. And so we talk about, what kind of person, how do you usually show up? And we show up differently in different conversations. So you may be this type in this conversation, but with this other person, you're in this type. And that's okay. That's not unusual. But just understand that that does happen. And so we talk about that. And then we talk about how to recognize, how to create that space so that you have the opportunity to show up the way you really want to show up in the conversations. Because everything's about conversations, right? Relationships are about conversations. So that's what we talk
that
about.
Yeah, that is our most frequent form of communication, right? Although we do communicate in a lot of ways, that's the most frequent one. And it's so interesting that you bring that up. There's a mastermind that I run each Wednesday with business owners, and in that mastermind yesterday, we were talking about, well, with your good friend Glenn Dutton, he was in doing some coaching on being centered and what it means to be centered. And as part of that conversation, one of the things of vulnerability that I had felt and shared was, it's interesting. I treat the people in this room and others that I work with better than I treat my family often, which that is so frustrating because again, like you said, those enduring eternal relationships that are so meaningful in our life. I often, for the reasons that you are going to help us understand, I take those for granted, I guess, and I don't value it. And I like just, well, we're family, so that's the way. And then I'm trying harder to build relationships on this side of things. And again, just felt convicted yesterday as I was trying to learn how to live a more centered life with Glenn's coaching to be able to do that. And so I want to make sure that you share with us again, especially where people can, put their foot in the water and see what this is like and start to experience this. Can you give us again that website, the day and time, so that people don't miss
Yes,
that?
Flourish First, FlourishFirst.com/workshop. So hopefully,
Excellent.
if you can put that on this as part of the
Pop it in
podcast
the
or
notes.
popped in the notes,
Yeah, I'll,
absolutely. And that's
I'll
where they
do
can
it.
register for this workshop. Again, and they don't have to participate, they don't have to say anything if they don't want to. They can just show up and we'll work through it with them.
Excellent.
And,
And
I
that's
appreciate
Thursday?
the time here, Russ. What's that?
That's
Thursday,
each
7
Thursday,
o'clock.
seven
Yeah, it's
o'clock.
not going to happen tonight, but every other Thursday it does happen.
Okay.
Um,
And when you say every other Thursday, does that mean like
no,
every second
it's
Thursday?
every Thursday, but tonight. Tonight I've got grandkid stuff that I got to take care of.
Oh, you are
But
working those relationships. You're a practitioner. Good
yeah,
job.
I'm trying hard. Yep.
Well, thank you so
So
much. Yeah, any concluding thoughts then as we wrap up?
I think we've said it. I'll just say it once again because I think it's really worth repeating. Over time, how we respond in those moments that matter, that's what shapes who we become. And when that starts to shift, it doesn't change just one conversation. It changes how we live, how we love, and how we lead.
Mm. Love the alliteration because it is so true to life for all of us. Well, my friends, it has been such a pleasure to have you join us today. Again, this is Keith Denning with Flourish First, and you can meet him and get a good test drive of what he's got to offer you and me to help improve the way that we approach our relationships every single day and all of the things that we do with greater awareness and be more responsive and less reactive and really begin to flourish first in our lives. So thank you so much, Keith, and we will catch you another time, my friend.